Hi everyone, Congressman Adam Kinzinger here. I wanted to offer my thoughts on a few things that have been happening both at home and in Washington related to clean energy and specifically nuclear energy. As many of you know, two of our nuclear power generating stations, Byron and Dresden, are now slated for closure in 2021. When I got the news, my first concerns were the impact to our local communities. These two stations employ thousands of people, many of whom are my friends and our neighbors, and most of whom are my constituents. This announcement affects all of us in a very personal way, but the sharpest effects will be felt by the employees themselves. Since then, I've been working to minimize the impacts to these individuals, their families, and their communities. As it happens, I introduced legislation, the Nuclear Licensing Efficiency Act, in late June, which would streamline and expedite nuclear licensing reviews, processes, and hearings at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission while also harmonizing the NRC fees and charges. This bill actually picks up on some of the unfinished business from last Congress when I got one of my other bills, the Nuke Act, signed into law. So earlier this month, when Speaker Pelosi announced that the House would take up a clean energy package, I was hopeful that the package would be able to garner wide bipartisan support and that it would address many of the issues facing the nuclear energy. After all, I serve on the Committee of Jurisdiction, the Energy and Commerce Committee, and we've done a lot of work to put forth dozens of bipartisan bills that this Congress has that would make a difference in the lives of the American people. I also saw it as the perfect vehicle to advance my bill and other pro-nuclear policies. Unfortunately, it's not what happened, and I ultimately voted against Speaker Pelosi's highly partisan bill. Frankly, there are some good policies in the bill, even ones that I've long supported. But like so many times over the past 2 years, Speaker Pelosi took a series of hard-wrought bipartisan measures from Energy and Commerce and other committees and lumped them together with a wish list of partisan priorities that tacks on over $100 billion to the deficit and adds massive new regulatory burdens. If you take a macro-level view of this package, you'll see it's actually somehow divided against itself. It sets up a number of moonshot goals and programs to foster breakthrough in innovation and energy development. These are things we should all be able to get behind, but at the same time, it creates a litany of new regulatory and legal barriers to energy use and development. The entire idea of a moonshot stems from President Kennedy's 1961 speech, in which he stated, in part, "This nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth." He was saying that we have to do whatever it takes. Congress would provide the money and the executive branch would remove every other legal and regulatory barrier it could. But President Kennedy's moonshot was very explicit and had a specific objective. Put a man on the moon, return him safely before 1970. Today, the term moonshot has devolved into Washington shorthand for pour a bunch of money into every member's personal policy priority or project, even those with undefined objectives, so that people feel good about themselves. And oh yeah, because overregulation also makes some of us feel good, we have to keep those in place too. But don't worry, the people actually helping achieve these goals, in most cases industry, can just wave their magic wands from atop their flying unicorns. This approach, people pushing through policies according to their emotions and without building consensus, it's not doing the hard work. It's not legislating, and it's not a moonshot. It's called virtue signaling. And without clear objectives and removing as many barriers as possible, it's a wasted effort because it's not going to amount to much scientific breakthrough. Speaker Pelosi and Democrat leadership in the House had every opportunity to craft a strong bipartisan package, but that's not what we voted on. What's worse, the Speaker doubled down by blocking dozens of great amendments that would have helped her get additional votes that could have brought us all closer to getting this thing done. In our district, with our two nuclear generating stations now slated to close in 2021, thousands of families and really entire towns are hinging on these plants. I offered 2 amendments to support a hurting nuclear industry and save these jobs, but like so many others, both were rejected by the Speaker and weren't even brought up for debate. What I'm trying to tell my friends in the majority is this. Today, it's the plants in my district, but there are others on the chopping block. This is not a partisan matter. In fact, the next generating stations slated for closure hail from politically blue areas. And still, I'm not seeing any panic or concern on the other side. My committee chair, the Speaker, and even the senators from Illinois can't seem to be bothered to support the nuclear energy let alone the abundant clean energy it produces, the jobs and wages it provides, or the budgets for schools and emergency services that have disappeared overnight when plants close. What have Democrats done instead of focusing on these problems? They've squandered their opportunities to legislate in favor of partisan politics. They've taken their eye off mounting national security threats, including those posed by China. In fact, the Speaker didn't even appoint any of her members to the China task force, which was astonishing, really. They complain about the president and take up dime store resolutions to disparage him, but they don't work with him. It's time that we get serious. Serious about good faith legislating and negotiating, serious about energy independence and reduced emissions, and serious about nuclear energy, without which the effort to reduce emission goes up in smokes and becomes a mathematical laughingstock. This nation is in the throes of the most trying set of circumstances it has faced in a decade: a deadly pandemic, significant social unrest, a mostly stable but increasingly hollow economy, and a hyper-polarized citizenry, just to name a few. And yes, we're all very aware that this is an election year, but just because we're getting close to November doesn't mean we have to stop legislating through consensus building. We don't have to stop working together just to put on a show. Pretty sure that the show will be in full swing regardless. It's easy to slap things on paper and ram them through with a thin majority. It's more difficult to create a lasting, balanced national energy policy. I hope that the Speaker recognizes that her failure to work on behalf of the whole House, the entire electorate that we all serve, and of the job that we were elected to do. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.